Hello everyone, this is a tutorial on a simple to-do list using Python and TraitsUI. So let's get started. Here I've set up a python.py file, but first we want to be able to install the latest version of TraitsUI, which is the package that we'll be using to create GUI applications. So to do this, we need to install EDM, which is similar to Conda, but it's a simple system. We just go to the website where EDM is. I'll link it in the description. Pick which operating system you have, so I'm on Windows, and then install and then download the package. So once the package is complete, we can go through the installation process. It's quite a simple installation process. Accept agreements, install. I would not do EDM for all users because you need root privileges for that. Install EDM, and then we're finished. So now if we're, I'm assuming that we're going to be using Visual Studio. So that's what I'm using, and it should be present. So if we type in EDM into the terminal, you'll see it shows up. A nice little extension I found was the Enthought Tool Suite extension, so we can install that, and it gives us a nice little UI for managing our EDM environments in a similar way that you would do it for Conda. So what will happen is we will be using the base EDM environment, and we'll be running the code from there, and we'll see that come out after. So for example, so we have our I have just a folder with a file called To-Do.py in there, and in this folder I can start coding up my code. So for example, I want to print something. Right. We can go to the EDM environment. We can set up the EDM environment that we're using, and then we can execute this file. So in here, we can type in to-do.py and run it as a Python executable, and it will run the file. If I save the file, it will show hello world. So now we need to get the required packages. So typically you would either use pip install or conda install, and it's a very similar process with EDM. So we want to do EDM install, and we're going to install two packages. Firstly, we're going to install TraitsUI, which has traits and TraitsUI, which are the main packages used for creating our GUI applications, but we also need a GUI backend, so we need something that's going to do the rendering. So what we're going to be using is the latest version, which is PyQt5. You can also use WX for legacy reasons, or PyQt4. So we want to use PyQt5. So I've already installed these packages, but this will go through the download process, and you have to accept for TraitsUI and PyQt5. So now we have these installed, and we can check this. We could import something simple from TraitsUI.api. And now if we run the command, the same executable, so from this file, making sure to save it, you can see that it runs without any errors. So we're able to import from this library. So the reason why I imported has traits is because we're going to start our first very basic UI element. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to make a simple UI which just has the text hello world in it. So to do this, we need to construct a class, and it's just going to be a very basic class. It's going to be to-do, and it's going to inherit. So the system that we use is we inherit from the hasTraits class to have a particular structure. And it might be daunting at first, but we're going to do a very simple way, and we're going to build up. Okay, so we have our class. Now, the way we add useful attributes to the class is we add attributes to it in the actual class itself. So we're going to add a special class attribute called my hello world, and it's going to be a and we need to define the actual type of this variable. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull something called a string. It's the capital string, and it's similar to a type declaration in any other language. So we're going to actually define our type here. And for a default value, we're going to put in world. Okay. So that's our class done. And now all it is a matter now of doing is creating an instance of this class and calling a special function on it. So my to-do is going to be to-do, right? And then, so this is going to construct the class. And then to view the user interface, the graphical user interface that has the elements defined by this class, all we have to do is do my to-do dot configure traits, and that's all there is to it. So making sure to save once again and running to-do, you can see the GUI application spawn. And so it's a string attribute. The name of the string is called hello world, and the field that it's representing is hello world. So we're going to get into more details on this after. Traits has a particular thing called a list, and we're going to remove our little hello world, and we're going to put we're going to make a to-do list. Now it's going to be a list. Now you can leave it blank, you don't have to say anything, and it can have any type in there, but we can make it a bit more strict. We could say it has to have elements which are strings. So now this is specifically a list which is a list. It's a list attribute, and the elements of that list have to be strings. Okay. Now, if we were to run this, after I save it, if I was to run this, you'll notice you get a to-do list, and it has a default way of representing it, but it's an empty list. In fact, interestingly enough, you can add elements and you can actually interact with it already. And we're going to make a default list. I'm just going to copy it over from here. So it's going to be a bit quicker. There we go. So I've got a list of 3 things that I need to do. I need to clean my car, I need to create this YouTube video, and I need to feed my animals. Okay. Now, instead of putting it directly into the list, we're going to do it a bit more advanced way of constructing this to-do object. So these has traits classes have a way of importing data into them at construction time. So what we can do is we can input a keyword argument as to-do list, and we're going to set it to this variable my to-do list, which is defined outside. So my to-do list. Okay. Remembering to save and running the example again, we can now see that there is the 3 elements of that list is now created in this. You can see there's clean car, create YouTube video, and feed animals. Now suppose I want to view these elements and I don't want the user to be able to modify them. This is a good introduction to showing what the view does. So within this class, it's implicitly creating a default view for it, but we actually have control over how it's being displayed in the GUI. And the way we do this is we actually import from TraitsUI. So from TraitsUI.api, there is a view, which is going to be responsible for the total view, and there's going to be an item, and I might as well import a uItem, which is just a convenience method for putting something in the view that doesn't include the name. We'll see this come up later. So we're going to define our own traits view within this class as well. So we can go my view, and we can call it view And this is the typical formatting we have, because a lot of views become quite big. We typically do the Java style, like object style of elements with tabs in it. We add an element to this view. So we want to add an item to view. And we're going to insert a string which represents which trait we want to view, or which trait corresponds to this item. So we're going to link these. I'm going to put this trait in this item. When I do this and I spawn user interface, we can see that it comes up with the same view that we had before. So this was the default view that was being shown. Get them? One example is style, and we're going to set it to read only. And now you notice that these individual elements, are still editable, but we can't add new elements, remove elements, or rearrange them. Now, for the to-do list, we want to use something called a checklist. So we want to create some sort of checklist to check off that we've done something. And TraitsUI has lots of different editors that you can pass to items, which are ways of representing traits in your GUI. So for this example, I'm going to build out some stuff, and then I'll explain what they are after I've built them out. So in this case, I'm going to remove this for now. I'm going to create a completed. So this is going to be it's going to be a similar list to the to-do list, but it's going to keep track of every single task that we've completed. And that way we can programmatically keep track of all them and actually manipulate them. Now, what we actually want to do is visualize the completed to-dos. And so if we do this, and we show the list, because what we're actually displaying here is this, but the to-do list has all the elements. The completed to-dos is nothing. So what we want to do is add an editor, which is going to edit the elements of to-dos through the user interface itself. So there's something called a checklist editor. Okay. And when you define an item, there's a special keyword argument called editor. And we're going to create a checklist editor. Now, checklist editor requires another field that is the things that are going to be edited. So the concept here is that it's going to display the completed tools, which is going to tell you which ones are completed, but it needs a list to grab all the things that it's going to put in the UI that you can modify. So the way we do this is values equals, name. So the name of the elements that are going to be in the checklist is going to be the to-do list. So it's going to be this list here. Now, if we do this, it will give us a UI, but it will give us something that's not quite right. It's actually a drop-down menu. So what's actually happening here is that it's the list of all the elements are the to-do list, and when I select one, it's setting completed to-dos to be a list with one element called clean cars. Now, to get the functionality that we require, we need to actually set the style custom. I'm just going to make this look a bit prettier. Okay, so here is our item. We've set the style to custom, which is the only difference, and now we have a different way of representing that data. Now we have an actual checklist editor. So we have completed to-dos, which is going to be a list of all the ones that are ticked. So that now at this current state, it's clean cars and create YouTube video, and the things that are being represented there are the to-do list in full. Okay, just to make it slightly easier, more user-friendly, we're going to use an U item, which is an unlabeled item, and you notice that will just get rid of that thing on the left. Okay, Just to give you an idea of what actually is, just to give you a solid, concrete idea of what's going on, I want to actually show the to-do list in the UI as well. And this, the completed, sorry. I want to also show the completed to-dos in there as a list itself. So this is representing the actual checklist editor, but this is going to just literally show you what's currently in that list at any time. Sorry. So, as I said, there's an empty list, there's nothing completed, but if I click create YouTube videos, now in the completed to-dos list, there's create YouTube videos. So this is a way of programmatically getting a handle of what things the user has clicked, and you can add interactions and whatnot. So I'm going to remove this, and we can start on the next step. So now we have a to-do list, but it's kind of hard-coded to use these values. What we want to be able to do is have a field where you can enter in a new to-do and add it to the list. So the way we're going to do that, we've seen already a component that can do this. We're going to add a add to-do field. That's going to be a string field. So it's going to be a string field. We can add the item to-do field. And just to give you an idea of what it looks like, we have our to-do field. We can add in whatever we want, but it's just a field that has strings. Now, what we want to do is we want to have a button such that when I click this button, it's going to add whatever's in this field to the to-do list. So we're going to have to add some bit of programming here to achieve this. So first of all, we're going to add to-do, and this is going to be a button. Pretty self-explanatory. So in traits, there is something called a button. And it essentially acts the similar way to a Boolean, except when you set it to true, it fires off an event, and it's basically an event handler. Okay, so we can add it into the view as well. I'm going to not label it, so it just shows up as the button itself. Add to do. Now, so there we have it. We've got our field, we've got our add to do, but you notice it doesn't do anything. So now it's up to us to code up the logic to be able to add this to do field to the to do list. So I'm going to take what's in here and append it to this list. So the way we do this is through creating a function in the class that gets fired whenever something happens in the GUI. So for example, I press the button and then I create that triggers this function to be called, and it does some logic within the program. So the way we do this in TraitsUI, traits, is to create a function with a special tag, a special syntax, which is underscore the trait name. So it's going to be add to do, and it's going to be when it changes, or when it's changed. Now, when we create a function, we have to put self. Okay. Now, so now this is a function with this particular syntax. It's going to be called whenever this button has been fired. And so what we want to do is we got to access the to-do list. It's in self because it's in the class. So self.to-do list. And we want to append. So it's a string. It acts as a string, so you can do string functions however you want. And you can append whatever is in the add to do field. So again, it's in self, add to do field. And there we go. So if we try this out, let's say get food, add to To-Do, and you can see it's added there. Now, one little interesting thing is the UI design. Jump. I'm going to add another To-Do, and you notice that it's getting a bit ugly. What we can do is there's special keyword arguments you can pass to the view to change its attributes. So, for example, resizable. Setting say resizable to true means that we can take the UI and we can expand it. And now if I go jump, you see it doesn't, the UI works fine. And the user can actually modify the UI. There's other things like manually setting the width and height, and there's lots of other things that you can do. Okay. Now the last little functionality that would be nice is to have a remove button. So in the similar vein, it's going to be very similar. We're going to go remove To-Do. It's going to be another button. And again, we're going to follow the same syntax here. So def remove To-Do, that's the trait name, changed. So whenever it's fired or changed, To-Do list. Now, to do this logic, we want to remove the last element on the list. That's a very basic functionality. Obviously, you can get more complicated, but this is what we're going to do for this. And this is just some syntax to say the to-do list is everything except for the last element in the list. So slice it all the way up until ignoring the very last one. Now we can add it to here, uitem, and we can, and now we can see it in the UI. So jump, I can add the to-do, and then I can also remove it. And there you have it. One little cleanup is these buttons look a bit long. We can fix this up a bit. We can use something called a group. So in the TraitsUI, there's something called a H group, or a horizontal group. And it's going to align everything in this element in a horizontal way. So we can do H group. And we're going to put these two buttons in the H group so that they show up side by side. Okay. And we're going to make sure to put a comma. There we go. So these two elements are now in a horizontal group. And there they show. So thanks for watching my tutorial. I hope you learned something, and yeah, see ya.